there's a lot of these individual things, like don't plow with an ox and donkey together, don't wear wool and linen together, don't sow mixed seeds together. Lots of individual statements, but they're not random. A lot of people, when they just read casually through Torah, a lot of these commandments just seem kind of like randomly thrown in there. But there is a plan. Each one follows the one before it and precedes the one after it for a reason. And some of these are pretty clear that they go together. Don't sow your vineyard with different kinds of seeds. Don't plow with an ox and donkey together. You can kind of see how these go together because they're about mixing things that aren't the same. Now, exactly why is a whole nother question. But a lot of the key to understanding this is in the next chapter, where we talk about Amalekites or Ammonites and Moabites and Edomites and Egyptians. And that this is also about mixing different kinds of things together. God says when Israel was to go into the land of the Canaanites, they were not to allow their sons to marry the Canaanite daughters or to take the Canaanite daughters for their sons. Not because there was anything inherently evil about being a Canaanite. I mean, nobody has any choice in what ethnic group they're born into. There's nothing inherently evil about an Ammonite that means they can't become part of the people of God. It's about their culture, their religion that they had used. But the Ammonites and the Moabites, one of the things that they did was when the Hebrews were coming through the wilderness, they would attack the rear of the caravan, if you want to call it that. So the people who were slowest, the older people, the weak, they would attack those people instead of attacking directly on the front. So this is behavior that God hates. He does not like people who are cowards who attack the weak. And it's not just attacking the weak, but protecting the weak. God says repeatedly that the orphans and the widows, the landless, these are his special favorite people. Loving your neighbor especially means taking care of these people. Doesn't mean that you neglect anybody else, but it means that you focus your efforts on the people who are most vulnerable. But those are the people that the Ammonites targeted in their attacks. And so when God says an Ammonite or a Moabite may not enter the assembly of Israel for 10 generations, I think what he's getting at is they need time to breed this evil culture out of them. And maybe proximity to Israel is the catalyst that's going to make that happen. We can see this in the book of Joshua when the Gibeonites trick Israel into making a covenant with them. What Joshua does is he says, we're going to honor this covenant even though we were tricked into it, but you're going to go live in the Levitical cities and you're going to be servants to the Levites. You're going to be the water carriers and the wood choppers for the Levites, who are the teachers of the law. So he says, not only are you going to live in Israel as servants, but you're going to be servants to the people who are teaching everybody else the law. So the Gibeonites, by living in this proximity, would end up learning the law, accelerating the change of their culture into a Hebrew culture. So the Gibeonites would become Hebrews within a couple of generations. The Moabites and the Ammonites, because they live over on the other side of the Dead Sea out in the wilderness, a little bit harder, and their culture was a little bit further gone. So I think God's plan here is that they live in close proximity to Israel and they see the worship of Yahweh across the river and these unified people who are getting rid of all of the cult objects of the Canaanites, and they're defeating all of their enemies. God goes before them, wins their battles for them. And witnessing all of this, they would say, we want to be like them. I think that was part of the plan, is that the Moabites would, over generations, become more like the Israelites, to the point where an Israelite could then move to Moabite during a famine, bring his family with him, and on the way back, you get Ruth, somebody who is ready to become an Israelite. This is 10 generations after Joshua has invaded and conquered the Promised Land. At least I think it is. So I don't know whether the 10 generation thing is talking about individual Moabites and Ammonites. Like this, when this Ammonite moves into your land, do you have to wait 10 generations from there before you can count his descendants as Israelites? Or is it 10 generations from when Israel came into the promised land and conquered it? I don't really know. You can look at somebody like Rahab. Her people were not allowed into the congregation of Israel. They were supposed to be wiped out or expelled. But God makes an exception because she demonstrates faith in him. Yeah. So she, even though she was a prostitute in living in the heart of a Canaanite stronghold, her personal attitude was different enough from the Canaanites that God says, here's an exception. Ruth
was an exception.
Her sisters-in-law, they weren't ready. They didn't want to worship the God of the Hebrews, but Ruth did.
Well, basically, a lot of these things don't really make sense to us, like 2 seeds in a vineyard and an ox and a donkey. There's no physical reason for that to be a wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like an ox and a donkey can't pull together, but they are different beasts for somewhat different purposes,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And plus you can eat an ox, not a donkey. Oxen is the most common in the world, form of animal traction, and you look at cattle throughout the world, everyone has their different breeds and stuff, based for their environment, like Brahmas that can handle the heat, they're almost like Egyptian, and then the cattle that we're used to in our environment here are more, Texas has really gone the Angus route. And that was originally an Irish or an English breed. And those cattle are actually best for beef. But then we have other animals like French Charolais and these other animals cattle that were actually developed more for traction. And that's why when you go to Europe, you can't get a good steak. It's like literally those breeds aren't as good of a quality as Angus that was bred more for dual purpose. So anyways, and then of course a donkey carries a load, carries a pack and not as much for traction. So just maybe they would, but again, some of these things don't really make sense because it makes sense to God and we have to trust him when he gives us the rules. But it's, I think, more about anything, even when it comes to the Moabites like that. God just doesn't want certain things mixed together. It's an unauthorized union, despite what our opinions are at the time. We might not understand the full picture, and again, it's not our question. We can reason this. Rabbis never figured this out either, so it's not really meant for us to have a full understanding sometimes of why God commands us to do these things. But it is clear that he doesn't authorize certain unions.
Similar to the food laws. I remember I went through a period of time where I was trying to come up with the health reasons for it, and
pork, that's tip.
Whatever it is.
Yeah.
But at the same time, over time, I realized, we can try to put reasons on it, but then you always have the other people who are like, well, no, if you feed pork, pigs acorns and put them in the shade and you do all this, you know what I'm saying? But there's ways that we try to reason, and I think that the point is taken, Brad, that we're just accept that this is what God is at, and I think there's nothing wrong with trying to reason it out and come up with an understanding of why it might be.
Yeah, we just need to hold that at arm's length and realize that whatever our speculations are could be wrong.